The Floating Tools panel allows you to style your Tailwind CSS page with many of the common classes directly within the page view, speeding up page construction and design implementation. No more switching between the page and the properties or style panel. Let's explore just what this tool allows you to do. Okay, so to start, let's open a brand new Tailwind project. So all we're going to do is just go to New Page or Project, and then select from the new Tailwind CSS blocks. I particularly like this new directory block. After opening that up, let's go ahead and save it. And then go ahead and open it as a project. So this isn't actually necessary to use the floating tools. However, I like a lot of the features that having this open as a project gives us. So the floating tool panel is automatically added to any Tailwind CSS project. As you can see here, it's already open on our new project. So if you do not see this, there's a couple of ways that you can get it to display. So we can just close it down by clicking on the X. Now, if we wanted to get it to reappear, one of the ways that we could do it is by going to the Window menu, and then within that, go to the Show Hide Panels, and go down to the Tools section. Then within the Tools section, simply click on the Floating Tools menu item. You notice there's also a hotkey combination here. So if we click on that, we can see that the Floating Tools once more reappears. So the hotkey combination that you saw is Shift twice. So if you tap on the Shift key twice, the Floating Tools appears and flies right to your cursor. This is really useful because say you're working on a particular item and the Floating Tools is getting in the way, you can simply move your cursor someplace else on the page, double tap the Shift, and get that Floating Tools moved out of the way but still accessible. If you want, you can also move it by dragging it here from the handle. The third way that you can get the Floating Tools to appear is if you have the design panel activated for your page. So the design panel is right here. It's opened by clicking on the palette icon. For this particular project, it hasn't been activated yet, so let's go ahead and activate it. And that brings this up. We're not going to go through all of these different panels, but there is a set of documentation up for the design panel, and the link to that documentation is in the written documentation where this video is located. Just close these down. So the Floating Tools, again, if they are closed down, can be opened up by clicking down here in the final section of the design panel on the palette icon. And that'll cause them to appear. They can be dragged wherever you wanted or moved around with the double shift. The Floating Tools can be used to add styling to your page elements in two different ways. By default, it is in set mode. That means that it will add styling to the currently selected elements. So in other words, if we have this selected and type on any of the tools, it will add it to that particular element. The other mode is paint mode. In this mode, you can select a tool and then use it to apply to any elements on the page that you click. And you can change between modes by going to this final icon in the Floating Tools and selecting the other mode. Let's look at set mode briefly first, and then I'll give you a demonstration of paint mode. By default, the Floating Tools will be set to add any applied stylings without prefix. So in the Tailwind CSS framework, responsiveness, changes at different page sizes, are added through prefixing each of your classes. By default, no prefix will be added, so it's the same as all. So if we just go over to our Properties panel, we can see that within the Properties panel, there's a set of tabs along the top here. There's All, Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large, and 2XL. Changing the tab to a specific size, for example large, means that any styling that we add through the floating tools will be prefixed with whatever tab we have selected here. Similarly, if we want to add a pseudo class, any pseudo class selected from the menu will also be prefixed onto any styles where it is applicable from within the floating tools. This is something to be careful about because if you forget to switch back to all and you go ahead and style, you might not realize that you're adding styling in a page or media query specific manner. So the floating tools for Tailwind CSS has over 12 categories of Tailwind classes that can be added. Let's start at the left and examine each. The first tool is used to add text color class to any selected or painted elements. For example, text red 600. So in this case, I'm in set mode. I have this H1 selected. If I go to this tool, I can select a shade of red, click it, and you can see that the text responds by changing color and the text red 600 class is added. If instead I'd had the large tab selected and gone and selected a color, you can now see that for a large page we'll get a text color of blue 600, and for all of the other pages that are smaller you'll get a text red 600, and we can see this by clicking here. I'd like to point out that any styling added through the floating tools, much like the styles added normally in the properties or style panels, will be automatically updated if you are using browser sync. When hovering over the text color tool, the colors that are displayed are either the base Tailwind colors, or if you've made changes in the design, either through adding new colors, renaming existing colors, or changing the shades of existing colors, that will be reflected within the panel. Now let's look just briefly at what paint mode is. So first, we're going to go ahead and take this class off. Then we're going to go ahead and switch our mode over to paint mode, and we're going to select our text color again. This time, we're going to go ahead and select again the text blue. Notice we have it on the large tab. Now we're going to go ahead and say that we want this one colored text blue, this one, and maybe our blog. So you can see that the tool is now attached to our pointer. Once we're done painting, we can select another tool from the toolbar, or hit escape to make it disappear, or go to the bin, click that, and the tool will disappear. We can now select whatever next tool we want and keep painting. Paint mode isn't just for adding classes, it's also useful for removing classes. So for example, if we wanted to revert all of the ones that we just added a class of text blue 600 to go back to their normal color, or just simply remove any text coloring, we can select no color, and then that gets attached to our pointer. We can just select each of the elements where we want to remove that particular class. And again, just hitting escape gets rid of it. Let's go back to set mode. The next tool in the Floating Tools panel also styles our text. In this case, it switches between the various fonts that we have available. So right now, we simply have a font normal class on our H1. We could, if we wanted, change this to mono or serif. And as with most of the tools, we can click on the X to remove any of that type of styling. I should also point out that any custom fonts that you added in through the design panel will also show up on the Floating Tools panel for you to add to your elements. So one of the things that you may have noticed changing in our Floating Tools panel are what particular icons on the panel are highlighted with inverted color. This is a quick glance at what types of classes have been added to any particular element. So as we know, this particular element has font text colors added, and the first icon on the floating tools has changed to an inverted color to display that. Going back to our icons on our floating tools, let's look at the third one. This particular icon lets us set our text size. So right now we can see that the H1 has a 7XL class. This can be changed. We can make it smaller. We can make it larger. We can keep it the same. And again, we could remove it with the X. The next icon over, the fourth on the bar, lets us set different weights for our font. So if we want to, we could make this extra bold. The next icon over also alters our text. It adds one of 3 text decoration classes, either underline, line through, or no underline. The sixth icon over allows you to control the capitalization of a selected element. The 4 choices are uppercase, lowercase, capitalize, or normal case. And again, you can remove it with the X. Next over is the alignment. So this allows you to align the text how you want, and your choices are text left, text center, text right, or text justify. And then the final tool for altering text is the drop-down menu that has a lot of lesser used text items. So things like line height, variants, and styles. Moving over, you might see a symbol that you find familiar from the Style panel and from the Properties panel, and that's the background. So this allows you to set the background color for a particular selected item. So for example, we could set this to a background color of red. Of course, this looks horrible, so we're going to remove that. Again, much like with the text colors, all the shades appearing in this color picker will come either from the base Tailwind colors or from any colors that you have defined in your design panel. Sticking with background controls, the next drop-down menu gives a variety of different lesser used options for styling your background, things like position and clip. The final 2 icons for adding styling classes to your page control the page layout, and they control your flex alignment either horizontally or vertically. To illustrate how these tools work, let's open up a different project. So I'm just going to close this down. So now we have this other page that's been designed with Flex. If we go ahead and select the container, what we can do is we can change to justify start, justify middle, justify end. We can also change our vertical. So you can very easily change the layout of your page quickly simply by clicking on the different flex items. The last thing to mention about using the Floating Tools panel is SVG elements. A number of our different templates do have these SVG elements. So for example, let's add a new page quickly. Use the Tailwind CSS blocks agency. By default, inline SVG elements are collapsed in the tree panel. That means that for complex SVGs, sub-elements can't be selected on the page. So for example here, I'm only able to select the main SVG. For simple SVGs, this might still be okay. So for example, for this one, we can still change the text color from the floating tools to have it change the actual icon color. For more complex SVGs, there are two possible solutions. So for example, for this one, if we wanted to edit something within it, we could click on it, go to the tree panel, click on the SVG, and that will expand it. Now at this point, we can select different paths on the screen. So if we click this, and we go ahead, change that background, it changes the color of that path. The other way that we can do it, if this SVG was collapsed, so we can collapse it back down by clicking on it, is we can change to paint mode. Within paint mode, you can now select any of the paths in the SVG. So let's pick that up as a tool, and we'll turn her shirt blue and his shirt blue. So that wraps it up for the floating tools. We're hoping that this new feature in Pinegrow will help you do more with less UI, getting your pages put together more efficiently, quickly, and easily.